Hello and welcome to Lore Watch, a roundtable freeform discussion about lore and our favorite media. I'm your host, Joe Perez, one of several lore-focused folks from the website, and I've got my typical cadre with me. I have the stupendous Matt Rossi. How you doing today, Matt?
I'm beyond infinity. I am unknowable. I am the darkness.
Well, on that note, we're going to move over to our other compatriot. Joining us today, talking with us about the War Within, is going to be Liz Harper, our the Grand High Poobah of the site, as Matt has once referred to her as. How you doing, Liz?
I'm doing good. I should put that on my business cards.
I think so too.
Just to heck with titles. Let's just go with that.
I mean, it is a title.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a made-up title, but it's still a title.
All titles are made up, technically.
Yeah, someone made all of them up at some point, so why not just, start fresh, make up our own?
Agreed. So today we are going to be talking about The War Within. We're going to be doing this with spoilers in mind. So if you're listening and you're getting ready for the game, we want to go ahead and warn you that there will be mild spoilers. Nothing for the major story beats. We're going to try to avoid those for a little while. But we really wanted to talk about at least like how the story is presented and some of the things that are different in The War Within versus the last several expansions, because there is a lot of difference, and maybe part of that is just a narrative choice that was already well in the works, or maybe it's prepping the way for more things to come. But I always thought it was interesting as I was making my way through the early access and making my way through the main story, how it was presented. So I think let's just start from the beginning. One thing I noticed, and I'm curious both of your takes on this, if you see the same thing, is that there's less of an emphasis on you being central to the story and more almost like going back to you're along for the ride. So not that you're not important, because you're the champion, you're always involved in what's going on, but it doesn't feel like the last, I gotta say, since Legion, really, you've been at the center point. You've been, the main focus of all the revolving story, but here it's the story is happening regardless of you. Like, you're just happened to be there. And it's like going back to, I want to say, Cataclysm, Wrath of the Lich King, Burning Crusade almost, where, yeah, you were there, but it didn't really revolve around you. It was just other things happening that you happened to participate in. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does.
Do you feel that's accurate or no?
I think to make a strong central narrative in an MMO, it's always a problem. It's always a struggle, because you have your players who are the big heroes, theoretically, but if you're trying to tell like a grand fantasy epic, like we're clearly doing here, you've got to have main central characters that you are writing from beginning to end. And you can't quite do that in the same way with the player character without just cramming words and stories into their mouths. So I think when they get into like these big storytelling moments, we always kind of wind up shifting focus away from the players, because it's possible, I suppose, to write stories like that when you have known quantities of these fictional characters that the game world has created.
See, and I think maybe for me the distinction is in the previous expansion, and I agree with you, right? Like it's a complicated thing, but in the previous expansions, you, even up through Dragonflight, you were dealing the killing blow, so to speak. And now we're back to the NPCs are essentially kill stealing. But like the final blow and almost everything is being dealt by an NPC. Side quests aside, because those, we're going to talk about those in a little bit. But there's very big, like, the NPC is back to being the focus energy. Matt, what do you think from what you've seen so far?
I disagree with you so intensely that I'm trying to figure out how to formulate it. Like, I don't feel like this is any different than the opening of Dragonflight, where the dragons and their shenanigans were super important and I was just sort of there. Or the end of, Shadowlands, which was very much all about Anduin and Sylvanas and everybody else. My character was there, sure, but I don't see how my character was the Grand High, poop. You said we're using Grand High Poop again. I don't see how my character had any real importance.
Because your character was the one that brought, just to clarify, in like Shadowlands, you took Anduin down. Arguing. You know what I mean?
I know what you're arguing, and I don't agree with you.
Okay.
I do not think that's what it is. I think that if anything, this is continuing the long legacy of my character. Like I was actually telling my wife about it while I was playing through it today because I've been sick. So today is the first day I really got to play it since the beta. And I was telling my wife that I kept feeling like Illyria would be talking about all this grand, important cosmic stuff, and my character would turn and go, "Ma'am, I hit things. Point me at a thing to hit, and we're good." Or you keep going on and on about, your sacrifice and all the things you had to do to safeguard Azeroth, and I am still not going to care because I hit things. I am not a psychiatrist. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of like how I felt. Like I definitely feel like Khadgar and Illyria and Magni and Anduin are all getting rich inner lives and such, and that's great if that's what you're looking for. But I don't feel like I again, it was very much like I felt in Dragonflight. My character is just there in a way that doesn't really feel. I miss the Legion feeling. I think Legion was the last time I actually felt like I was important. Like I was doing something important. And that's not to say this isn't a good story or anything. I just definitely don't feel like I feel like World of Warcraft has been running away from the idea that my character is powerful and important for a long time, which is dumb. Because even as they're not putting me in the central focus, even as they're kind of like letting every other NPC character carry the story, they're calling me champion and I'm the one who has to actually go out there and do everything. You know what I mean? Like, oh, hey, stuff is happening in this place that we're in and I have to go save people. Okay. Yeah, that's good. If I'm not important, why am I the only one doing this? So yeah, I don't know. This is sounding more negative than I intend it to. I don't dislike the story so far. In fact, I like quite a bit of it. There's a point where, Thrall and Jaina are like, yeah, we're going to go get the Alliance and Horde. We'll be back. And you're like, so I should just continue on then, I guess? Okay. I'll just keep adventuring. I don't know.
I get what you're saying. And I agree that there's some, I don't know how to phrase it, but I'm not disliking the story. And I want to make that perfectly clear. I'm actually really enjoying a lot of the beats. I'm enjoying the experience, so much so that on the first day of early access, I did not want to log off because I wanted to continue playing through the story to get to the cutscenes and get to the individual pieces of the story. It's just that good. I really, really enjoyed it. I will say that I think there has been a nice increase, at least from maybe some previous expansions, of filling in a lot of the NPCs and their personal growth and backstory. And I'm not saying that they didn't do that in the past, but Dragonflight, and we talked about this before, while the dragons got their day, outside of the Black Dragonflight, a lot of them sort of, I don't want to say felt like a logic, like there was no real, like, true out of left field growth. Because there was actually, there was a ton of it, but this feels like there's more somehow. Like the characters are getting more personal time, I guess.
Let me say something that I think speaks to what you're talking about, but is not quite exactly what you're talking about. One of the things they've done in terms of the mechanics of the storytelling is there's a thing now where you can ask people to just give you the skinny on them.
Yeah.
Who are you again? What's going on here? And they'll just tell you who they are, and you might think that's completely immersion breaking, but it isn't, because you don't have to ask them. You don't have to say, Daegron, what's your deal? But you can say, Daegron, what's your deal?
Yeah.
And I think that helps a lot, because then the character just tells you their deal. And I'm sorry, there is something very helpful about a character that Daegron is now, I don't feel like this is a spoiler, Daegron is now in a semi-adult.
Yeah, I think that's in the trailer, so I think that's fair game.
Yeah. So when you're talking to him and he's telling you, well, I guess I'm a prince, but I don't really feel like a prince. I feel like more of a scholar, and you're sitting there going, thank you. You've cleared up everything you're doing. I don't have to know any more about you. And I don't think people understand how little things like this can be of huge benefit. like it just makes it so much easier to get what you're trying to get across without having to worry too much about it. I don't know why they didn't do it earlier. I think it's a very good move.
Yeah,
does feel
go ahead, Liz, sorry.
It does feel like there are a lot more dialogue options, and not just like, okay, who are you? But like, okay, you were just talking about that thing. What is that thing? And you'll get like a page of dialogue, and it's not voice acted dialogue, but a lot of times you'll get something, and you're like, oh, okay, I understand. Or it may just be something you can ask for flavor, like the duck wearing shoes. Which, if you ran into that, you know what I'm talking about. Or maybe you ran into that, you still don't know. I don't know. And there are also a lot more stay and listen moments in this expansion. I think we first started seeing those maybe in Shadowlands.
No, they were Legion. They were in Legion.
Legion?
Legion has them.
Okay, and you just, you'll see people and you can click stay and listen, and they'll have a little dialogue with someone that kind of expands the story, expands what they're thinking about, and those are some great moments. And this expansion is full of them, actually. There's a lot of people talking about how they're feeling, for better or worse. I don't know. It feels like a very different vibe in that way. And it's partially because of the different way they're telling the story here with these little kind of aside moments.
Yeah, like I think, going back to what Joe was talking about, I don't think that it feels like my character is any less important or that I'm just along for the ride, but it does feel like we're actually getting information about these people outside of what we're doing. Like, I don't know if this is a spoiler, so I'm going to tell you right now, Joe, you might want to tell me not to do this when we're done. You might want to cut it or whatever. But when you first contact Magni, he's bitter.
Yeah, I don't think that's a spoiler. I think that's fine.
Okay.
That's early enough that I think that's fine.
Yeah. When you first contact Magni, he's bitter. He's like, I did all this stuff for Azeroth, and what's she done for me? Nothing. I'm still made out of diamond. I still can't feel anything. And, the past couple of years, I stopped not talking to her, and now she isn't talking to me. And so there's this whole bit of him being he's bitter. He's angry. He does not like the lot life has dealt him. And it's not really important. Like, it doesn't change anything. It doesn't, he's not like, I won't help you because that would be stupid. The world is going to come to an end. I live on the world. My grandson's on the world. I don't want my grandson to die. So obviously I'm going to help you, but I'm not helping you for Azeroth's sake. I'm helping you for the sake of the people I love. And that's it's just a nice moment. It doesn't take away anything. I don't know how else to put it. It doesn't change anything in terms of what the story is, but it does add a context to what's going on. One of the reasons that the major villain is doing as well as they are is that all the heroes are completely scattered and disorganized. And you see it. You don't just get told that. You literally see it as you go through the quests. You realize these people are not working together. Of all people, Moira Bronzebeard is the one who points out, maybe later because we've got stuff happening here. So yeah, I think that's a really nice moment in terms of how the game's storytelling. I think it's similar to what Joe's talking about, if not exactly the same thing. There's just a sense of these are people with their own lives. Yeah.
One of the things that I think is a really nice addition to, and something that I highly encourage our listeners to do when they get into the game world, one of the things that they've seemed to have a lot more of is not just stay a while and listen moments, but you can directly ask characters how they're doing. And you get a lot of information that way, and it's really, really cool because, like, before, it was far and few between the beginning. We saw a little bit of it with Belamath when the elves were getting their new homeland situated in the Dragon Isles. But now we're seeing it really carry over to just about every NPC. So as you're doing stuff and as the story progresses, those options and the responses change. Like the different things you can ask them about change or update. The things that they talk about or how they're feeling updates based off of where you are in the story. And it's one of those things where I know a lot of people are going to like power level and try to get their way to 80s or as fast as possible. But when you have the time, talk to everybody. And I know we say that a lot, but this feels like an expansion where there's just a lot of story payoff even in those moments.
And I think it was in the podcast pre-show last week that we were talking about video game characters dealing with trauma. Like these are people who have been through a lot of crap and they just keep going. They just keep on being the big hero of the moment. And, you know, you're seeing a little different side of some of these characters. Matt was just talking about Magni, who was just kind of, you do the expansion pre-quest, and he's just kind of done. He's like, Azeroth hasn't been talking to me, and he's upset, he's frustrated, he's unhappy. You can see some of that fallout. He doesn't just come in and like go, Azeroth needs us, I'm going to be the big hero. He's upset. He doesn't want to help because he feels like he's been hurt by his involvement, by what Azeroth has done to him. But you see that throughout when you talk to these characters, because they aren't all doing great. Even the ones who project this kind of heroic atmosphere, sometimes you talk to them and they're like, wow, I'm glad that worked because I didn't think that was going to work, kind of thing. So you get more of these sort of inner vibes, and kind of that everyone is a fully fleshed out character. And even though maybe they're doing some really heroic things, like behind the scenes, there can be some struggle. There can be some mixed feelings. So that is very interesting to see. I feel like we've gotten a whole lot of that throughout the main story quest.
Yeah, I would agree.
Go ahead, Matt, if there's anything more you wanted to say.
I was saying, yeah, I would agree. And then I said it, and I realized I'd been a jerk and interrupted you. So now I feel bad. But that's pretty much it, yeah.
No, and I think that's actually really important to note as far as like looking through the quest. Like you're right on the money, Liz. And I have been wildly enjoying sort of like the depth of exploration of that, of actually getting to see like some of the effects of it. Because again, some of these characters, and this is not a spoiler because this is just knowledge, like Moira has been around for a very, very long time. We have been dealing with her, helping her, going against her wishes since, vanilla WoW, when we were first sent to go rescue her from the Dark Iron Dwarves, only to find out that she volunteered to be, she voluntarily went. This was him. Yeah, she was in love with him. She wasn't there against her will. Or Magni finally dealing with a lot of his trauma, because I mean, he's gone through a lot too, just ever since essentially turning into Stony McRockhard there. Like he's dealt with so much stuff, like the being a bad father and dealing with that, and the fact that he has a grandson, the fact that he's Azeroth's speaker, and like you finally see him begin to process that. And I think that's really important, and it's really kind of cool because it adds depth to these characters that you don't get a lot of times in an MMO. It's the stuff you would more traditionally see in literally like a single player RPG. Like if you were to play Dad of War, you would expect this, but you wouldn't.
It feels like sorry, I didn't mean to.
No, go ahead.
It kind of feels a little bit like we're in World of Warcraft's Knights, the Old Republic.
Yeah.
Where we're getting like a lot of stuff that you would not necessarily expect to see in a multiplayer game. And oddly enough, I think it's working for WoW. I think it's actually.
Yeah, I agree. I think it does really work for WoW. And I think that it's probably been a long time coming, I think. And we have, again, such a depth of characters, and Matt and I have talked about this so much, and all of you wonderful listeners at home, most of your questions are because of this. Is like these characters have been around for a long time at this point, not just the 20 years of WoW, but even before that, they have histories, they have complicated pasts, and
like Jaina goes back to like Warcraft 3 and Arthas as well, and they themselves draw back from characters from Warcraft 2. And it's just there's a lot of stuff happening here, and a lot of characters. Like there are new characters too. There's I can't remember his name, but I can't think of another way to put it. I call him the stick up his butt Earthen, the one that like comes to the beach and he's like, you must leave now. And then Magni comes up and he's like, wait a minute, you're made of diamond.
Yeah.
He's like, you're made of diamond. Oh wow. That means you're one of the special Earthen. And he's like, he's not an Earthen at all, buddy. That's not an Earthen. But regardless, I like that they recognize some tropes and then they just kind of push through. I don't know how, like, they're like, yes, this is a trope, but we're going to just get through it quickly because we don't have time. You know what I mean? Like, there's a sort of efficiency to it, which is one of that guy's favorite sayings. He's like, you seem to kill things very efficiently, so why don't you help us kill some more things? And I was like,
we kill things very efficiently because that's like all we do. That's our morning, noon, and night. Okay.
It's like, yeah, sir, I don't know how to tell you this. I hit things. I've been telling Ilaria that for a bit now. I hit things. If you've got things you want me to hit, point me at them. Otherwise, I don't really know what you want. Clearly, you want to have some kind of cosmic discussion, but I don't care. I just hit things. Which I'm having fun role-playing it, because it's not my usual approach. Usually, I'm like, all of Captain Lore want to know. But now I'm playing a character who could not care less what the backstory is. Yeah, the purple girl, oh, she's that knife that does... Okay, yeah, whatever. Do I get to hit her yet? No, it's a cutscene. All right, well, let me know when it's not a cutscene anymore, and I'll start hitting her. So yeah, I honestly do like a lot of the story. It's just that I definitely don't feel like my character is driving anything. They are not in charge.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I was getting at the original, like, because again, even as recently as, and this is just again in the opinion, Dragonflight, you may not have been in charge, but you were the one that was doing all the things, at least for the most part, and like especially in Shadowlands, where you were the Maw Walker, so that's what you did. So it's nice here a little bit. And again, none of my criticisms earlier or notes were a bad thing. It's just different. It's just something that I wanted to note. But it's nice to see some of these stories actually start to... Well, I mean, it's exactly what Metzen said, right? Like, when he first announced this trilogy, when we first figured out, like, had him come back, he mentioned that we're going to start getting the loose ends tied up because that's the only way you can move forward. And we've talked about that at length, where there's so many loose ends that they can pull on, so many threads that they could sort of experience, and then they're finally doing it. They're going back and they're pulling on these threads that have been around for, in some cases 20 years, right? Like, or maybe a little bit less in some cases, but it's nice to see some of that stuff finally getting to see the light of day and get to completion. And what that means for the future of WoW, again, we can speculate at other points in time, but it is still refreshing, as far as I'm concerned, to see, like, Ilaria's story continue, see Magni's story continue, to see Anduin's story continue, who, again, is another character who has had an excessive amount of trauma ever since he was a kid. I think we talked about that in the last podcast. But it's nice to see them actually start to process this stuff and start to, have their stories I don't want to say make sense, but like Anduin vocalizing is a nice touch. And this is not much of a spoiler because we know Anduin is here as a central character that's been pretty apparent since before the game. Well, like, as soon as the game was announced, as soon as you saw the trailer. But he actually is present. He's not just the guy we're chasing. He's not the MacGuffin. He's not just like the kid that get sort of looked over, I guess would be the case, or that he only seems to have these really strong moments in books. Instead, here we are accompanying him on his journey, and it is a journey. It is something that is expanding, and I think that's really important. So, or at least from my end, I think it's really important. So, from your first impressions, do you think that the characters that they introduced to us in this expansion, do you think they're filling those roles well? Or, because I mean, I'm trying to think how to phrase this. This trilogy was almost presented as a passing of the torch, and we're starting to see maybe a little bit of that, I think. We could talk a little bit about Dagran, and without going into too many specifics, but this is really the first time we've seen Dagran be mostly an adult and dealing with sort of like big things. Yeah, his mom and his granddad is at his side, but it's interesting to see him like firsthand involved when before he was just some snot-nosed kid, right? And now he actually has depth and character, and I can feel like if they were to end Magni's story after this expansion and there would be no more Magni, I feel like they've done a good job of setting him up to be a worthy successor. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I understand what you were saying. I don't know yet if that's the case. Like, I need to see more of him. I do like what they've done with Dagon so far, but I still don't really feel like I know enough about him to make a judgment on that. I do like that he's not like a cartoon, he's not pulling a Jafar on us or anything. If he does turn out to be a villain, he's going to be subtle about it, which I like. And if he doesn't turn out to be a villain, he's still kind of being subtle. Like he's not flinging himself at anything. He just sort of is. I really like when he's talking to Bronn in Dalaran. And he's like, Uncle Bronn, do you realize what this book is? And Bronn has this glazed over look like, oh God, the kid's going on again about something. And it's like, I feel like
Bronn doesn't get to complain about this. I'm just saying. No.
That's why it's great that of all people, Bronzebeard is getting outdone by his snot-nosed nephew. He's like, oh, for God's sake, lad. And at the same time, there was a point where I'm talking to Bronn about something he asked me to do. And he says something, and I'm like, do you realize that your brother might be dead? And that, all these people are it feels like, sometimes we've never really dealt with the fact that Bronn is flighty. You know what I mean? Like
he has been ever since the beginning, yeah.
But we've never really actually had anyone call him on it. And in a weird sort of way, it feels like the story is doing so. Like the story is Bronn, stuff is happening. There's a point where he sends you to go talk to the Algar expedition, which is basically just the characters from Hearthstone hanging around in Dalaran. And I mean, I don't have a problem with that. That's, those guys are cool. But my point was just that, they're all talking about the perils of these kind of expeditions. And isn't it nice of Bronn to check up on us? And I was sitting there going, did he check up on you? He sent me to talk to you. I don't know you. I don't know. It's weird to think about how little effort Bronn actually makes. I feel like I'm being overly negative about the guy, but in a way, that they're fleshing this out. I like that they're doing this.
Yeah, I mean, but that's always been his character flaw, and we're sort of leaning into it, right? And this is not a spoiler because I feel like this has been present with Bronn since day one. So he's very obsessed with what he's interested in, and that's it. He can completely just miss the most basic of things because he hyper fixates. And we see that a lot with him. We see that when we're doing stuff with him as far back as Wrath of the Lich King, where we're going to the north and going through Alduar and the Hall of Stone and the Hall of Lightning and doing all those things with him, because what does he do? Hyper fixates, causes other problems, because that's just what he does. Yeah. And again, go ahead.
It's interesting that they've kind of woven Bronn's flightiness into the story right here, mechanically into the game, because he is your companion on Delves, which are kind of the new single-player dungeons. And so you start in the game, and he's like, oh, there's this cool new place to explore, meet me there. And you go there, and you meet him, and you do the delve. And then you finish it, and he's like, I'm off. I heard about this other cool place to explore. And then you go and do that. It's mechanically baked into the story that this is a flighty guy who's jumping from adventure to adventure, and you've just got to run to keep up. In a weird sort of way, you want to do.
Yeah, in a weird sort of way, Bronn is the ultimate manifestation of the thing we've been talking about players doing for years. We show up, we cause and then solve a major problem, and then we take off before it's really. No, we don't stick around for the cleanup ever. Mm-hmm. And Bronn is that times 100.
I mean, you're not wrong.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting in Delves, inside the Delves, he is it's just he's so on character. He's running from thing to thing. He is pulling aggro on half of the dungeon. He is, he's trouble. He's always been trouble. He's still trouble, only now he is trouble in a mechanical gameplay way throughout season 1 of the expansion, because we have been told that we're going to get new companions in Delves seasonally. So we've got Bronn really driving kind of the story, if you want to call it, of the Delves right now. But I'm kind of curious as to, okay, you're switching this out later. Who could replace this guy? I don't know. We're gonna find out.
It depends a good deal on what they want to do with the storytelling in future delves. Like the next, as the story of the expansion progresses, it might go from let's go have rollicking adventures to it's this life or death. We got to get serious.
Yeah.
It does depend on what they're going with it. But I do get your point, and I think it's kind of an interesting thing. Delves themselves are fascinating in terms of how odd they are. They are essentially just, well, they're like Diablo Rifts. I mean, that's really how they feel to me.
Yeah, I was going to say, they feel like a hybrid between Diablo Rifts and scenarios.
Yeah, and now this is a lore show, so I don't want to go like and spend 20 minutes talking about that, but I do want to talk about how they use that to tell story, because one of the things Liz has just mentioned that I think is really interesting to focus on is if they replace Braun, who they replace him with. Like, are they going to replace him with other members of the Explorers League? Are we going to get like to see what the heck Elise Starseeker is all about? Like, you know, there's a lot of possibilities in terms of what they're going to do here.
And also, does that mean they're going to change the lead-in quests to these things? Because there are quests you run through in the world that, you know, Braun is like, okay, let's go and explore. Is someone else going to do that? It's just a really interesting, you know, it's a gameplay mechanic, but it also communicates story. And Braun is he is the perfect guy to be doing this. He is so much the perfect guy to be doing this. It's hard to imagine replacing him, even though he is very annoying and he pulls so much aggro all the time.
Now, another thing that I do think is something we can talk about is environmental storytelling. We've talked about this a lot in previous expansions.
Okay.
Go right ahead.
I have an example on that one. There's I gotta see what the name of the town. My character is currently in the town, so that will make it easier. In Freywold Village, there's a book you can find. It's a diary, and it's where one of the NPCs that gives quests. And you go down, you read the book, and it talks about all these different things, and it's kind of wild because, like, it's this Earthen who's been banished from Earthen society. So they're talking about what their life is like now, and they've set up a diary so that their memories will continue when they're no longer here. And there's one point where she's like, I don't know, this might be a little spoiler. It's a minor one. She's like, you know, we don't actually know the name of our keeper, the one that you know put us here and you know started us on the path, and we don't know the names of the Titans. What were they? You know, were they? And I can actually hear my character saying, "Oh no, I know their names. Yeah, no, I met all of them. Yeah, which one do you want to know? Eonar? Yeah, Eonar I've met like twice. Yeah, she's got a whole thing going on. I guess she was dating my goddess. It's complicated, but yeah, Eonar. Yeah, I know that one. There's Amonthul, and I can just imagine the Earthen all losing their minds. But it's just this great bit of like this person's diary, which in between the pages of actual diary content telling you about the world and so forth, there's descriptions of the way the book is laid out. Like that the book is inlaid with gems and jewelry. That the book is like, you know, it's just really interesting how they use this one little thing to explain to you what the Unbound Earthen are, what they're doing, how they're set up differently than the other Earthen, why there's not like there's a lot of conflict between various Earthen groups, and that they really do lay it out in terms of just things you see while you're there, not just characters talking, but little weird things. It kind of reminds me of they've borrowed a little bit from Fallout, like when you find the data entries and so forth. It feels a little bit like that. Like they've taken their books and they've popped them up a level to make them more lore accessible.
Yeah, and there's a lot of that spread around here. Maybe, I don't want to say more than other expansions, because they definitely have hit a lot of stuff in previous expansions. But in just the first zones that we're in, there's so much of that. There's so much of like books or hidden away NPCs that you can talk to. Again, the whole talk to everybody thing. Or little bits and pieces that highlight what's going on in that area, and show you kind of, I want to say like almost like a deeper dive into sort of like the mundane aspects of those areas. Like one of the areas that was previewed, it was Hallowfall. I'm not going to talk too much about the story there, but everything about that zone, literally everything about that zone reinforces the story of that zone. It reinforces the daily lives of the NPCs there, and it draws you in with, again, hidden books or notes, or they have like ledgers that you can find in various buildings, but then also the main quest itself, right? Like it's everything about it just sort of reinforces, yeah, this makes perfect sense. This is what this is. I understand completely from the moment I step in here to the moment I'm done. Yes, all of this is perfect. Like, I think that is a insanely massive triumph as far as zones and storytelling goes, at least in my opinion. I don't know how you feel about that. I know, Liz, you've done Hollowfall.
Yeah, and there was one little thing in Hollowfall that I thought was really interesting. This isn't a spoiler, but there's a guy in one of the towns you can talk to, and he talks about homesteading, about how they, send off, Arathi to like farm sites, and, they make sure they're well supplied and they can protect themselves and look after themselves. And he has this whole little speech for you. He says, well, you don't look like the type to settle down, but this is what I do here. And okay, I saw that, and like my first thought in my little head was player housing a win. But also, it's just this neat little detail, because Hollowfall does have a culture that you see fairly militarized. There are a lot of soldiers there. They're clearly, not having a great time. They're fighting this battle. They have problems. I'll just leave it at that. But there's life. There's life that is happening here. There are people making homes, making families, establishing themselves in this place that they were kind of lost to. And it's very interesting seeing that, to think that the Arathi have just started over, but built something, made an effort to build something. And it's beyond adventuring. It's beyond the stuff that we're doing, beyond the stuff we're there for. But that little bit of the world is there anyway, because not everyone can be, the big frontline fighter. If you're going to live here, you need farmers, you need people need homes, you need to establish yourself. You need to establish a society, not just a military barracks.
Yeah, I think that's also a really interesting thing. I don't want to call it like a minor thing, because it's not, but it's like, it's such a really good view into like how that situation plays out. Again, we're going back to the whole people processing trauma and the like. This sort of falls into that camp as well, right? Because it's the daily struggles of where they're located and what they're doing. Mm-hmm. And it's just, again, just bred into everything about this zone, from the architecture of it to where settlements are. It is really well done, and it's not just this zone, because most of, if not all, the zones do this to a very good degree, in my opinion. It's just, it really, I had to take a step back and just like, wow, this is really really good. I was super impressed with it. So, did any other zones or anything else like strike you like that, or anything else of note? Not just Hollowfall, because I mean, we could talk about Dornogal a little bit, since that's basically the first place you'll be.
Well, that's what I like about Dornogal, actually, since you brought that up, since that is the one that I've been playing the most recently. I haven't been to the other one since the beta, but with Dornogal, one of the things I like is that it is laid out. It is a city that makes you think it is a city built by the people that you find in it. Yeah. It feels like their city. It doesn't feel like sometimes you go to a city, it doesn't feel like it has any rhyme or reason to it, especially if it's a horde city. I'm looking at you, Orgrimmar. I don't know what you're doing. You're crazy. You're drunk, Orgrimmar. You're drunk.
No, Orgrimmar was built by goblins, rebuilt by goblins. So I mean, that could be part of the problem.
But regardless, there's just this really nice feeling that Dornogal really is a city built by the people who live there.
Yeah, and not only that, but like one of the things that I think is interesting, and this is not a spoiler, because this has been present since the last expansion, is that one of the things that was noted in the last expansion was this group of survivors, this group of Earthen displayed or evolved to display dwarf-like qualities, despite not having any exposure to dwarves, right? Like not going to the Curse of Flesh, not becoming dwarves or having dealings with dwarves. And I think it's really interesting because the other thing that I think was cool about this particular zone is that not only does it say, yes, this is a building that, or a structure or a city that, this is exactly the type of people you would expect to be here. Absolutely. But it also has all of those, not uncanny valley, but it's like, here are the things that are close. And like, you can see the influence, you can see the similarities, you can see these little things that you would consider familiar, which is really, really kind of nifty. And they did a really good job of making it its own thing, but making sure you had that feeling of familiar with it. And I thought that was really neat.
Can we talk about the Earthen's voices for a second? Because
yeah,
I've heard a lot of people be like, oh, they don't have an accent. What's going on here? But I think they have these absolutely perfect because they are a toneless, they have no tone. They are very flat. They talk like the creations of the Titans. Because there's a sort of robotic quality to it where it's.
Yeah, I don't even know if I'd say toneless. They almost sound tired. Like there's a kind of, when you talk to the machine speaker, she's the one I really noticed this with. The machine speaker talks like, I think she doesn't go faster and she doesn't go slower. Each word comes out as if it was simply another word to be laid down on the way to an explanation. And I like that they've done that. I like that they've controlled that. I think Liz has got a good point about that too, that they feel like regimented in their speech. Like they all talk the same. And I do like that. I just like this like total feeling of like a society that has long since forgotten that it is a society.
Yeah, and I think one of the other interesting things about it is this is also the first time we're seeing a society built out of non-Curse of Fleshed individuals, and it is a unique set of struggles that they have to deal with, and I really like that. I really like that this is not just what dwarves or humans or elves. It's not a typical mortal race, and so you get a really interesting look at how things probably were, right? Like it's almost like a time capsule in a lot of ways for the folks that used to our predecessors in WoW, right? You get to see a lot of that, and you get to see a lot of what it was probably like to see entire cities and entire societies of Titan constructs, of Titan Forged, which I think is fascinating. And then the idea of, like you said, Matt, that the everything is purposeful, everything has like that voice. The voice has like a distinct cadence to it. And for folks that are saying that they don't have an accent, why would they? Like that's the interesting thing. Why would they? They're Titan constructs. They're physically created by Watchers. Why would they have an accent? Watchers don't. Tyr didn't.
Yeah.
Right?
Their voices sound like every Titan construct we've met. They have that very similar cadence, that calm, even tone. It's so interesting because of the way this stresses that they may look like dwarves, but they are not dwarves. They are dwarves that never evolved beyond their Titan programming. They've been locked away here, trying to continue to follow the edicts the Titans left for them, but time has passed. They're doing their best, but time passes and things fall apart.
Yeah, and also I will say this, not really related to that at all, but still something to keep in mind. A North American accent is still an accent.
Mm-hmm.
If the Earthen talk like North American people, which they do, that's an accent. Just because they're not doing a Scottish accent doesn't mean it's not an accent. And it tells you something about them that they do that. There's a choice by the people telling you the story to use North American means robotic. Think about that one when you get around to it. But it is something to think about.
Yeah, I think they've done a lot of interesting touches with the Earthen in particular. I think it has been a lot of fun to sort of experience and poke around the city and poke around with the NPCs. Again, another perfect case of talk to everybody, please. Mm-hmm. You will thank me later. But even in the things of how they sell commodities, in the way their tavern keepers react. Like, there's so many cool little tiny things that are just, I never would have expected. And it really does sell a living world, an environment in which, you know, you're walking into something that's not static. You're not walking into, like, that was one of the things that I think when we got to the Halls of Stone, when we got to the Halls of Lightning, those places were static. Alduar was static. Nothing changed, right? They were pieces of history lost in time that we had managed to go back and see. Here, while this was a place that was lost to us in a lot of ways, it wasn't stagnant. It kept going. It had to. It had to keep enduring. And yes, there were things like conflict, or there were things like internal breakdowns, or the fact that things degrade over time that they all had to deal with, that gives it that lived in world feel. It isn't this pristine thing. It isn't this vault, this archive that we just walk into. And I really, really like that, because it's for the first time in a while, I think, because even with Shadowlands, because we didn't have anything to compare it to, going there just felt like that's how it always was. And even when we went to Zereth Mortis, that was just how it was. It was sort of like, I don't want to say stagnant, but it was stasis. There wasn't anything to expect to change there until we got there. Here, life went on. Things continued to happen. And you really get that feel, especially when you start talking with the NPCs, and particularly with the side quests. And Liz, do you want to talk a little bit about, like, just how good the side quests are?
I have actually done very few of the side quests because I wanted to finish the main story quest. So I'm like, okay, I gotta focus. If I get distracted, I'm gonna still be here in a month. But just talking to people on the side, just the few side quests, it feels like it reminds me of Dragonflight more than any other expansion, because it has this very large world, and the world is not focused on the big heroic events. You've got side quests happening that have nothing to do with any of that. You have this whole group of kobolds who are friendly, I guess, and you can go and help them out. There's this whole making friends with kobolds quest chain, which is not something I had expected to happen, was not on my bingo card, but here we are, and it's pretty great. And I do feel, what do you think, Joe? I feel like there's a real mental health kick, like, throughout the game, not just in kind of the stay a while and listen conversations, not just in the ability to go, okay, how are you doing here? But, like, there's one NPC in Ringing Deeps, I have that right, who is, like, labeled as repairs, physical and immaterial. It's like, oh, okay, and you talk to her, and she's like, can you repair my gear, or can you repair my state of mind? Which, sounds funny, but if you ask for that, she says, go to Gundraz, sit in the mineral spring, stay for 45 minutes, have a chat with your fellow adventurers, ask them of their day, their goals, their accomplishments, listen to their stories, and share your own. Make yourself remember that you were all in this together. That should help. And that's it. It's just this little tiny thing on the side, and it's like, yeah. And the kobolds that you help, one of the things I love that kind of the head kobold says is, like, we're friends now, right? Well, not all is doom. More friends means less doom. And there's a lot of good, happy friendship feelings going on here, because I think one of the problems in games like this, games in general, is we are here to tear things down. We're here to defeat the monsters. And sometimes, Matt was talking about this earlier, sometimes defeating the monsters means a lot of collateral damage that we don't want to deal with. But there are signs of life here. Life beyond killing, I guess.
Yeah, and there's certainly a bunch of that in the side quests, although the side quests definitely have a lot of relevancy to what's going on in the zones themselves. Yeah. But it's interesting you bring up the mental health thing, or at least the acknowledgement of it. I think part of that is, obviously the writers and and people that worked on the game have a vested interest in that for themselves, which they should. Y'all hydrated, right? I know some of you listen to the show. Make sure you hydrated today. But there is some really cool moments like that, because that's something we've talked about before as well in the show, is you have these huge traumatic events that never seem to get dealt with, or at least not dealt with in any healthy way. The citizens never get to process what happened to them. They don't get to process the fact that the sky opened up and like weird Valkyries came down and like robbed people, or, you know, that the dead were walking out of nowhere, you know, just 20 years ago. Right? Or however long, how many game years have passed since Warcraft 3? You know, a lot of these people are around for that, or a lot of people have to.
Plus, the dead have walked in like multiple WoW expansions now, so it's not like even if you just limit yourself to WoW, it's plenty of times the dev just showed up.
Oh yeah, but I'm just saying, like, but they've never really sat down. Like, I've never seen a quest line like, yeah, that really stunk. I saw my uncle crawl out of the grave the other day and like tried to eat my farm. Like, what is that? Like, how do I process that? Like, now you're starting to see little signs of life like that, and it makes sense too, because one of the other things that I think is interesting is they're isolated from the rest of the world, and there's a whole set of story and there's a whole set of lore around why, and from different aspects of it. And I think that's really interesting too, because it's not, it sort of defies some of your typical logic or what you would normally expect to be reasons for that, and really fleshes it out. And then some of the side quests are dealing with that sort of isolation, and then dealing with, I don't want to say limited resources, because these are pretty rich biomes across the 3 zones that we go to right now. But like, it deals with like the geopolitical like boundary lines. It deals with the infighting, like Matt brought out earlier, or the different factions that have different desires or different directives. It's an interesting look into how a Titan Forged could be a living thing, not just a construct, but also the things that are living, how they survive and deal with it. Because when you find the Arathi and the Earthen, like, they have distinct feelings about each other. There are definitely some ideals in place with like every faction that has sort of like any sort of cognizant thought.
There's actually something I wanted to mention about the Arathi.
Yeah, please.
Which, you know, kind of one of the things that's fascinating about the Arathi is that we don't get even close to their full story here. This is an introduction to them, and one of the things it does is it broadens up the entire world. It finally makes canonical that the world is bigger than we've seen it. That there are things on the other side of the map that we have not been to yet. They straight up say this. That's where they were. That's like they left the Arathi Highlands and they went over there and did this, and they're upfront about it. That they're now coming back towards, you know, the part of Azeroth they left. This is the closest they've been to the original Arathi Highlands in quite some time, and that to me is really fascinating. It doesn't get it, and it's just a setup. It doesn't even get dealt with. It just gets mentioned.
I think you an interesting point too that you bring up that can be noted for the entirety of the expansion, which is straight up, this expansion represents a broadening of the world that we have not seen before, not in a while. We've known about like Northrend before Northrend was a thing. We knew about Pandaria before Pandaria was a thing. Like, yes, they're there and they broaden up the world, but think about those zones. Think about what they actually added to the map. It's still sort of in a tight circle, right? They're all kind of right next to each other. This is the other side of the world, and it's the first time we've seen something outside of our little region ever. There used to be a big thing, and some folks will remember this, with Ulduar. Ulduar used to have, and it's been a while, so I haven't really paid attention to the globes, but I thought they had changed this at some point, and maybe they reverted it back. But there was wild speculation about the world being larger and other places we would go based off the globes in Ulduar, because the globes in Ulduar showed other continents. Not just Kalimdor, not just Lordaeron or the Eastern Kingdoms. And I think it was kind of maybe pushed away for a little while because there weren't any plans to do that. Maybe not at the time, or maybe they were just waiting for the right moment. But this is confirmation, again, the whole expansion is confirmation that the world is larger than we think it is, and that the world beneath the surface is larger than we think it is. Our first glimpses of that a little bit maybe in like Cataclysm, and maybe a little bit in Battle for Azeroth and Legion, little bits, but these are full, like a whole like world beneath the surface, right? And that's what it's showing us, and that's not a spoiler. That's one of the entire premises of this expansion, and it really begs into question: how big is the world? Is it twice as large as we think it is? Is it 4 times as large as we think it is? What lives beneath the surface? What other mysteries do we not understand? Azeroth has often been referred to as an egg. Matt, I think, made this comparison, I want to say a few years ago, that Azeroth was like an onion. It just had a bunch of layers. And as we start to peel back layers of it, we find out more and more. And this entire expansion is a testament to that. Like, we don't know how far below the surface we are. We don't know what's below us, because there are definitely depths.
Is Aberrus deeper than this? Is Aberrus less deep than this? Are there other places like Aberrus that there's other things have built fortresses? We don't even know if we're going to see other underground regions. Yeah.
And I think that's really fascinating, because it does something that a lot of people have asked: how much further can you take World of Warcraft? Because again, the game's been going for 20 years. But this just proves that the world can be as large as they want it to be. And not just the surface. The surface can be as large as they want it to be at this point. We don't know how large Azeroth is on the surface, but then below the surface as well, and almost as if it was like I said, a second world, like the Russian nesting dolls of planetoids. But I find that really, really cool, because it opens up so many possibilities for where they can take the story into the future, or what they can do with it, and what we can come to expect, not just from this expansion, but the next 2 expansions after this. Because after this, we go to Midnight, and then after this, it's the final stand of the Titans. And like, what does that mean? What does that bring us? How does that bring us anywhere? How does it bring us deeper into Azeroth, or what does it show us what Azeroth is? Like, because I don't know. You can't tell, I am absolutely in love so far with this expansion. It's made a very good first impression on me. It's almost as good as the first time I booted up Pandaria. Which just absolutely floored me, and is one of the best expansions a video game has ever had. But this is starting to really like hit those buttons for me, hit those little check marks of expansive world, yes. Immersive storytelling, yes. Immersive world, in environmental storytelling, yes. Interesting threads being pulled on from things that people maybe have forgotten about for years and years and years, check. Like throwing everything you know about the planet into complete disarray and making you question things that you've said for the last 10 years, check. Like it's hitting all of that for me and making me excited to dive in. And I guess I'll since I said my piece with that, I'll leave it to you two as our sort of our parting thought. We'll start with Liz. Like, so far right now, where you are in the game, having completed the main story quest and doing the content, how are you feeling about this expansion? Not just story-wise, but just in general, like holistically, what's your vibe on it?
I've got a really good vibe about it, because I was worried with Chris Metzen coming back, because he is a big fan of those fantasy tropes. He loves a big classic fantasy story, and we've seen a lot of repeated stories in World of Warcraft. And, maybe we're going that way again, but this game has the same kind of expansive world building that we saw in Dragonflight, with all of these little side corners to explore. There's a ton to explore here. There are tons of characters, not just these main characters that we're being dragged along with through the story, but lots of little side characters who have interesting things to say, who have thoughts about the world. And the world seems maybe more interconnected than it has in a long time, in that these aren't just people in a static situation. These are people who interact with each other, like There's some conversations about how the Arathi used to have communication with the Earthen above, and they were like, we didn't know. Were they all dead? Because we haven't heard from them lately. And just things like that. Like, this is not a bunch of different societies in a vacuum, even though they've all been isolated for a long time from us. It's different societies that fit together, different peoples that fit together, and maybe that work together to accomplish goals. And it's very interesting. It feels like a great world we're building right here.
Matt?
There is a quest for the warband. It's a quest named Space Ghosts on the Coast. That I don't think you can. How could you possibly make a better name for a quest involving ghosts on the coast of something than Space Ghosts on the Coast? I mean, I ask you, and you don't answer because there is nothing you could do. It is, like, quite frankly, I wouldn't be surprised to find out Anne wrote it. It was just perfect. It was a perfect name for that quest. The quest itself wasn't anything special, but I liked feeling like even there's a lot of work going into stuff like that, stuff that might seem ancillary. I think we often forget, like, how much institutional knowledge there is in the World of Warcraft team.
Mm-hmm.
Like, these people have been doing the biggest, or at least one of the biggest MMOs in the world for a very long time now. 20 years this year.
Over 20.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think there's a lot more to, like, little things in this expansion than there have been before, although it's certainly building upon stuff they were doing already. But it definitely feels like some stops got pulled.
Yeah, I would agree. And this is, again, if you've made it this long, I encourage you to spend time deep diving into each area, each zone. If you have gone through and completed the main story quest and you're looking for, other things to do, I highly encourage you to go back and complete the quests in the zone. The hubs are very clearly marked on the map too, which is always a nice touch. I'm glad to see that they still continue to do that. So you know where you have to go to find more quests, but not all of the quests are going to be on the map. And there are some that are just hidden away, or some that trigger from items that you find in the world. Look for the purple glows, look for the shiny objects, look for the quest markers that aren't on the map as you're moving around the world. Really just kind of get out there and explore. And it's one of the few games of recent years that I really feel rewards you for doing so. And also, you're going to want to do that because there's going to be a lot that Matt and I are going to be talking about in future episodes. They're going to be some of the weird, obscure stuff that they have scattered throughout this world. So when you find it, you're going to, I want that bingo check mark of, oh, I know there's going to be an episode on this, and y'all can sound off in our chats. But I think that's going to do it for today, folks. Blizzard Watch is made possible due to the generous contributions of patreon.com/BlizzardWatch. Your continued support means that this podcast site and community is able to thrive and grow. Blizzard Watch supporters enjoy exclusive benefits like early access to the podcast, a better chance at having your question answered on our podcast, or the Q&A and ads-free site experience. Again, if you have questions for this or any of our podcasts, be sure to send those into podcast@blizzardwatch.com. Specify the show that it is for in the title, and any special pronunciation of your name. If you want to send us anything on Discord, we have the Q and Podcast questions channel, which is open for everybody. You can do the same thing there. If you are a Patreon subscriber, you can go ahead and hit us up on our Patreon Q and Podcast questions channel. Same rules apply, but we tend to look there first as a way of saying thank you. And if you absolutely do not want to send us an email and don't want to send us something on Discord and you want to send it through Patreon, you can do that. Dan and Liz are very good at making sure that we get those, and we do integrate them when it makes sense with what we're talking about. Moving forward, we are going to be talking about the War Within quite a bit. We're going to try to avoid heavy spoilers for story for at least a couple weeks, but we can only hold that back so long. And if you are asking us questions, please bear in mind that if it is a major spoiler type question or question that deals with a major spoiler, we may push that back and not get to that for a few weeks while we wait for people to catch up, out of respect for all of our listeners and players' time. We tried very hard today not to spoil anything too major. Hopefully we did that for you. But I am so looking forward to diving deep into this. I'm going to drag Liz back on here probably a good 2 or 3 more times as well. Because this is the most involved I've seen Liz in the story in a while. We have a little behind the curtain. Liz and I are in the same guild. We have a spoilers chat, and I'm just noticing when Liz comments there versus Dragonflight, where that really wasn't a thing. So I'm happy that you seem to be enjoying the story, because it means more blood for the Blood God as far as the story goes.
I don't want to bleed for the Blood God. I just want to enjoy this. Just let me enjoy this.
Well, hopefully you at home are enjoying it, but we'll catch you next time, friends.